The injury bug continues to be unfriendly to Louisiana. Let's discuss it here on Ragin' Rundown. What's good, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome into another episode of Ragin' Rundown, all Cajuns all the time. I'm your guy, Jamarcus Fitzpatrick, but you can always call me Fitz. And in today's episode, we'll be unfortunately talking about another injury happening for Ragin' Cajuns football, as linebacker Kailep Edwards will be sidelined for 6 weeks after suffering a torn MCL here in fall camp. And it is very early on in the camp process, entering the second week. And with that being 6 weeks, Coach Des said the timeline would be around the USC game. So that's not a terrible amount of time that you're missing out on, but it is something that ultimately you didn't want to see happen, especially after seeing what happened with Sheldon Sampson. And now also you have other injuries that have been factored in as well. Some lighter injuries. Coach Des mentioned that Landon Strother and Trenton Chaney, who are both receivers as well, have been dealing with shoulder injuries. Candidly, when I walked out to practice, because they had their first morning practice of fall camp, I was walking around and kind of making mental notes of, all right, who's lining up here, who's the starters here. And the first thing I saw was Kailep Edwards with a brace and on crutches. And so before Coach Des addressed it, I was prepared to ask, hey, what is the latest on Kailep Edwards? We saw him on crutches. What's the latest? He beat me to the punch, answering and getting ahead of that, being able to discuss everything. And he pretty much laid out all of the injuries that happened. He confirmed the hyperextended knee of Sheldon Sampson, which we talked about here on the show. And I also broke the news first over my day job at KETC. So a lot of injuries that were factored in. And so Coach Des, in his opening statement after practice was over, talked about all those injuries and how the team is now dealing with them and what they're going to be doing moving forward in camp.
You know, the one serious injury right now is Kailep Edwards. He has a partial MCL, sorry. But we did get good news yesterday. It looks like 6 weeks, probably USC would be a stretch. Certainly we're not going to push it. He was having a good camp. He kind of, it's one of those things he just kind of fell on. That's why it's important to stay off the ground. Trent Chaney and Landon Strother have been limited a little bit with bruised shoulders. It's nothing serious. It's just, they're limited. So, they're not taking a bunch of reps, which means, you got other guys taking more reps down the line, which I think leads to some of that. And then Shelton's deal. So the last OTA in the summer, hyperextended his knee and fell on his shoulder. Doctors checked it out. They felt like the shoulder was more significant at the time. So I was a little surprised, when we got to camp. He is moving around a lot better. They don't think structurally there's anything wrong. He did have some swelling in the knee. They think, it was hyperextension and some bruising to go along with it. We're going to do everything to make sure, out of, taking all the precaution we can to try to get him back. But he is moving around better right now. He's still out, but, these things happen. So, we got to get through it. The good thing, like I said, is Kailep's prognosis is pretty good considering what it could have been. Shelton, we feel like we'll get out of the woods with that pretty soon here. And then certainly Trenton and Landon are, they're pretty much day to day to being able to go back to full go.
So there you have it, all of those injuries laid out. And like I mentioned to you, I made my observations when I walked out. Saw Kailep Edwards on crutches. I saw Sheldon Sampson still in a gray jersey, but in pads like everyone else. Once they went into individual drills, I did not see him running routes, but Trent Chaney and Landon Strother were both running routes, catching passes. They're just non-contact. So you're trying to maintain keeping guys as healthy as possible, which is something that not just the Cajuns are dealing with, but every team at all levels of football across the country, because you're going against each other. You're trying to get in good work. You're trying to work on technique, but you're out there competing. And football is a sport that is not just, a contact sport. It's a collision sport. And so because you're having so many collisions going over and over and over again, day to day, especially in fall camp where you have opportunities and windows to get in so much work throughout the time, injuries are going to happen. Football, you are at a 100% chance of getting injured at some point. The severity of it all depends on how blessed you are in your career, from broken fingers to rolled ankles. Like, things happen in football because, like I said, this is a collision sport. And so, with that in mind, many would think, well, how do you manage that? How do you deal with all these guys early on in camp dealing with early nicks and bruises? How do you manage that to make sure that ultimately you can get to the finish line of camp and then can get to week one and continue to keep yourself healthy so what happened in 2025 does not repeat? Um, and so, because of that, I asked Coach Des right after this, how do you manage keeping guys working hard, continuing to do the right things without, you know, getting them hurt in instances, and opening the window of opportunity for injuries to happen? And how do you manage guys like a Sheldon Sampson, who was limited in spring ball and is now not practicing here in fall camp, making sure that they're going to be conditioned for when you actually open the season? So I asked him that question, and here's his answer.
Truthfully, the concern becomes the guys who do practice, if that makes sense, because the work that's spread out now, you spread it a little bit less, right? It's a little more accumulated on those guys that are practicing. So that's why getting Trent and Landon to continue to go and take those reps, when their legs are good and all that stuff's just a shoulder. We continue to do that. We adjust practice a little bit. We started out a true 2-spot practice, where it's 2 different fields and you're getting a few more reps and you're going fast. We trimmed down a little bit. We're still getting plenty. We're kind of doing like we did in spring, where we have, all 3 groups on the same field. We're still going 1s, 2s, 3s. You just cut back, 2 reps per period with the 3s, and you cut back 4 reps per period with the 1s, which, 1s and 2s is not ideal, but it is what it is. I'm sorry, 2 reps per period with those guys. So 4 total. So, you cut back a couple. But I think in the big scheme of things, you can't just continue to wear the tread thin. You got to do what you'd like to do and what you need to do to try to keep everybody healthy are 2 different things.
That's a difficult job for any coach across the country, trying to maintain intensity for guys to make sure that you're not coaching up a soft bunch of guys, while also making sure that they are healthy enough to be able to go out and compete when the games actually matter. So Coach Des is continuing to work through these things, and they're going to continue to battle through to make sure that they can get to the finish line at the end of camp and to the start of the season. Now, the question is, who's the guys that are going to step up to fill in these holes? We've talked about in a previous episode about the receiver room, but there were some guys that Coach Des himself pointed to, one that I talked about, and then also who steps up into that linebacker position for Kailep Edwards in the instances where the Cajuns go 3 linebacker sets. We're going to talk all about that when I come back here on Ragin' Rundown. Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning into another episode of Ragin' Rundown. We're going to get back into the action in just a second. But before we do, if you're watching this podcast on YouTube, please do me a favor, like it, share it, and leave a comment down below. But most importantly, make sure you get subscribed to the channel. If you're listening, please follow the podcast feed, rate the show, and leave us a review, because that's going to help us get in front of more Ragin' Cajun fans just like yourself. So Kailep Edwards has a torn MCL and will be out for 6 weeks. And by all accounts, they are not going to be rushing to get him back into action as they shouldn't, mainly because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that this young man is healthy, not just for football, but for life after football. And the second reason that I think that they're still going to be in a really good spot is because they have so many other guys that have ability to be able to play. So the Cajuns are a predominantly 4-3 based defense, where you have 4 down linemen, you have 3 linebackers, and then all the guys there in your secondary. Obviously, when they're playing, spread teams, you'll see a 4-2-5, or you may see like a variation of the 3-3, where you have 3 down linemen, and the jack, who is also an outside linebacker, becomes that 3rd linebacker for you and can drop into coverage, but also rush the passer. And so you've got to be able to have multiple guys that, hey, can play Mike linebacker, can play Sam linebacker, which is the strong side, can play the Will, which is the weak side linebacker, and then the Mike obviously being the middle linebacker, the one kind of calling the defense and making sure the checks and things are going down. Okay, so you're almost kind of cross training instances to make sure that guys understand the defense well enough to where, hey, if one guy goes down, like in this instance, you can bump someone over and say, hey, now you're playing the Sam, or instead of you playing the Mike, you're going to play the Will. And that's going to help because now you have options across the board. So they have a lot of guys that are in this linebacker room. And this is a program that outside of when KCOSI went from, I think, the 23 to 24 season, have seen different starters at the linebacker positions almost every year of the Desormeaux era. You think back to when it was Jordan Quibido and Chris Moncrief, and then KCOSI and, I think it was Kendra Gant at one point. Then you think about last year with Jaden Duggar, who's now with the 49ers and has been doing extremely well. So kudos to him. Jaden Duggar and Terrence Williams, like they've seen different variations and combinations of linebackers along the way. And now that is once again something that's looking really good for them. So when I was out in the linebacker or watching practice, I walked down to the linebacker drills to get video of them. And the position coach, Scott Stoker, was coaching them on a drill where it was kind of like they were reading downhill and trying to see whether they needed to scrape over the top or if they were filling to go and make the tackle downhill. And the first two guys that were up were Jake St. Andre and Connor McPherson. And when they were doing other drills like team sense drills on the defensive side, the first two linebackers that ran out again were Connor McPherson and Jake St. Andre. So those are kind of your locked guys that you know for certain are going to be in the mix. Kailep was your third, but now other guys that you're going to be looking to, Micah Johnson, Coach Des spoke very, very highly of, which we'll get to that in just a second. Ethan Veal is another guy who's a redshirt sophomore out of Zachary who had really, really good plays during the spring ball. If you go back and watch that episode or listen to that episode that I recapped after the spring game, he had a lot of really good plays for you. You even have Hayden Darbon, a former Eunice product, getting into the mix as well that can make noise for you. But one player that Coach Des brought up was true freshman Harrison Kader, who came from Catholic high school in Baton Rouge. He's 6 foot, 198 pounds. So he is very young and doesn't have a lot of experience, but Coach Des has pointed to the ability that he has. So I asked him about that linebacker room and the makeup that they have and how important it's going to be to have all of these guys ready once the season starts, especially with Kailep Edwards being out of the mix. And here's what he said.
That's the question, right? Who's the next one? Is it Prince? Obviously, with Kailep out right now, so he's out of the mix. He was practicing well, but Caleb's out right now. Is it Ethan Veal? Micah Johnson has had an outstanding camp. He's one that I knew last year during the season, when he was still mostly on scout team, that he was going to have a great year for us, and he is not disappointed. And then, I think Harrison Kader is the young one that really, I think he's going to play for us this year. Whether it's just on teams or has some stuff on defense. The kid is really talented. So it's a good group, man. We got a bunch of them that are rolling in there. I think they're playing really well, communicating well, playing physical. Like I said, we've kind of been in this cycle really every year. Other than 24, where we had KC coming back as a starter. Every year from 22, it's been new starters pretty much every year, and it's fun to see guys rise up to the occasion.
Forgot to give a hat tip to Princeton Malbrew, the Lafayette Christian product. On the roster, they have him listed as an outside linebacker. So when I was looking at the list, all I could see was just the guys that they have listed as regular linebackers. He's listed under the outside linebacker or jack position on the roster. But he is also someone that's in the mix as well. He looked really good in the drills while I was watching along the way also. So he's thrown into the mix. So you have a ton of options, and you also have a lot of depth at that position now where, okay, if Jake St. Andre needs a breather, you can throw Princeton in the middle. Or if Connor McPherson needs to come out, you can throw in Ethan Veal. You can put in Micah Johnson at the linebacker position where you had, Kailep Edwards. It gives you options and it gives you opportunities to let other guys get experience out on the field. And what the Cajuns do a really good job of is if they feel like, and this is across the board, not just on defense, this is across the board. If they feel like a guy can produce, they'll give him some playing time. it may not be a full-time starting position. Like, very seldom have we seen a guy as a true freshman come in and just completely take over and start right off the bat. But they could get 10 to 15 snaps. And if those are 10 to 15 impact snaps, then that role can continue to progress. That's the way that they have assumed things, especially under Coach Des, where they are in the business of developing high school talent. They come in, they get a few reps, or they might start on special teams, and then the next season they become more of a reserve role and they get more opportunities. And then their third season they may become the starter, and from there you're rolling. And so getting these guys in, that helps you when you get in a situation like what you're in now with Kailep not being in the lineup for an extended period of time. Which, to that point, on the opposite side of the ball in the receiver room, with Sheldon Sampson not practicing, with Trenton Chaney and Landon Strother being limited physically, not being able to be in contact situations but still running routes, you have other receivers that now have the opportunity to step up. And we talked about that in a previous episode when we talked about Shelton being out with the hyperextended knee. And those guys have been stepping up to the plate, the Kadarius Wade at the X position. But Coach Des talked about particularly how important it was not just for those guys to be shining right now, but he mentioned a young guy as well. Here's his
Yeah,
answer.
some of it's really good, right? You know, Russ Babineau has been competing his tail off. Like competing on the ball. I mean, doing some really good things out there. I mean, you know, when you get the ball in his hands, he's running and he's doing it the right way. He's competing down the field. Kadarius Wade, I think, has stepped up. Aside from one day that he didn't have a very good day, you know, the 5 out of the 6 were really good. You know, Christian Brooks is a freshman that right now at X, you know, a couple of those guys that you want to step up and respond, you know, they're not practicing great, you know, so Christian is. And, you know, the thing I've told him since January, I don't care if you've been here, if you got here in June or you've been here for 6 years, we're going to play the ones that are going. So
we're going to play the ones that are going. I love to hear it because especially now with the 5 years, 5 seasons eligibility rule that the NCAA has established, you don't have a red shirt. And so you don't have to worry about whether you can play guys more than 4 games or not. If somebody's producing, throw them out there and let them keep playing. So to hear that you have a true freshman in Christian Brooks that is out there making plays for you, which he is a 6'2", 176-pound freshman coming from Zachary High School. When you're able to hear that he's coming into camp and is pushing for an opportunity to play while you have an older player that is out, that's something that you like to see. That means that you're going and you're recruiting guys that aren't just going to, you know, settle and wait their turn, that they're going to go and take it. And Coach Des has made it extremely clear that he's going to play the best guys that are out there, which they've always done that intently. But he's making it very clear that there's no such thing at this point of if you're a true freshman or not. If they believe that you can go out and can execute what they have in mind, then they're going to go ahead and give you an opportunity to play. So Christian Brooks, Kadarius Wade, and then also Russell Babineau, a local product coming from Acadiana High School, a guy that, you know, I covered while he was in high school. And if you know, Acadiana does not throw the football nearly as much. So he's used to blocking more, but the way that they utilized him sometimes in that offense was on the jet sweeps and the, you know, now screens, the bubble screens out there in space, and allowing him to just get out in the open and work. And so for him to continue to get these opportunities now with other guys not being in the mix, it's going to be interesting to see, because there's only one football. You have Lunch Winfield under center, and he has ability to not just make plays with his arm, but with his legs. There's only one football. So it's going to be up to this coaching staff, Coach Desormeaux, offensive coordinator Tim Leger, Coach George Munoz with the tight ends, and the entire staff to come together and formulate and say, hey, if Christian Brooks is coming out and he's, you know, getting it going and he's getting open and he's beating one-on-one coverage and he's catching the football and he's continuing to stay hot, he might have to be someone that we throw into the mix. If Russell Babineau is getting off whenever we give him the jet sweep and he's getting, you know, 5+ yards or even moving the chains every time that he touches it, we might need to implement that a little bit more in the offense. So it's an interesting time right now because you have two guys that you were expecting to be huge contributors for you that are not practicing, one that will be a little bit more long term. What I believe is that Sheldon Sampson will be ready for week 1, which is ultimately where you want him to be ready for, because that's when it's going to count. But at the same time, you don't want to rush him back into this. You want to make sure that he's as healthy as he possibly can be, that he's as conditioned as he possibly can be. So that way, when you put him out there on the field, he's able to execute it and can play at a high level. And even if he's not ready, you've now proven that you have other guys in the mix that can also go out and make plays. So we'll continue to keep our eye on this and see how guys continue to get healthy. Other guys then maybe shake things up a little bit. One thing also to note, when I was looking at some of the starters, because when I walked in to get ready to go and shoot practice, I could glance a little bit to see what team was running off the field. So it looked like ones were running off the field. And on the offensive line, if I'm remembering correctly, from left to right, I know the exact players that it was, but I'm trying to remember exactly what order they were in. The left tackle was Zay Alexander. The left guard was Caden Morrow. The center, Cooper Fordham. The right guard was Matt Broussard. The right tackle was George Jackson. That's how you look on the offensive line. Obviously, you have Lunch Winfield in the backfield. Stephen Blanco was in the backfield with him as well. And then we talked about all the different receiver combinations that you can have. Tight ends, Caden Jensen, Brock Chappell. That's how you're looking on the offensive side of the ball. The Cajuns have their first scrimmage of fall camp on Friday, and we have been told that we will have the opportunity to watch. So I'll be there. I will take as many notes as I humanly possibly can, and I'll drop an episode afterward reacting to everything that happened in that scrimmage to give you a good point of view of what truly this team is shaping up to be as we inch a little bit closer to September 5th, when the Cajuns will host the Lamar Cardinals. So that's going to wrap up this episode of Ragin' Rundown. If you made it to this point in the episode, thank you so much. Please do me a favor. If you're watching on YouTube, please like it, share it, leave a comment down below. But most importantly, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. And also, if you know someone else that's a Ragin' Cajuns fan, share that link with them and let them know that we're covering all things Cajuns right here on Ragin' Rundown. If you're listening, please follow the podcast feed, rate the show, and leave us a review, because that's going to help us get in front of more Ragin' Cajun fans just like yourself. I'm your guy, Jamarcus Fitzpatrick. We'll see you guys next time.